You have heard the rule your entire adult life. Save 3 to 6 months of living expenses, put it somewhere safe, and do not touch it unless disaster strikes. That advice helped a lot of people for a long time, but it became popular in an economic environment where basic living costs stayed relatively stable from year to year. Today, that baseline predictability is largely gone. The monthly prices for housing, food, insurance, and routine repairs fluctuate with more frequency than they used to. At the same time, income structures have shifted. If your paycheck comes from freelance contracts, gig work, commissions, or varying hourly shifts, a rigid one-size-fits-all savings target leaves you exposed. If you are entering the new year with an emergency fund strategy that has not changed since 2019, your safety net is likely providing a false sense of security. Take Alex's case. He modeled his savings on those standard 3-month benchmarks, keeping his money in a basic savings account. He checked the box and felt responsible. Then a real crisis hit, and he watched that money drain from his account much faster than he ever expected. Look at this line graph tracking his finances. The flat line represents his static savings target. The sharply rising line represents his actual living costs. The number he had saved no longer matched what his daily life actually required. That sudden depletion forced a complete reevaluation of how a modern financial cushion must be constructed. Relying on unverified assumptions about the cost of living guarantees your safety net will tear the exact moment you need it to catch you. The process starts by moving past generic estimates. Pull up your actual bank statements from the last 90 days. First, build a vertical bar chart by adding daily essentials: rent, utilities, groceries, transportation. Stock remaining monthly obligations on top: insurance, debt, phone bills. Divide that 90-day sum by 3 for your average monthly baseline cost. Finally, multiply by the months of coverage desired. Grounding your target in your current, real-world expenditures is the only way to establish a mathematically sound starting point for your savings. When people hear the 3 to 6 months rule, they tend to skip the math and pick an arbitrary round number. Maybe it's $5,000, maybe it's $10,000. They adopt a set-it-and-forget-it mentality. They hit that target, leave the money in an account, and never reevaluate what they are actually spending. For the vast majority of households, running the actual numbers reveals that their true requirement is noticeably higher than the round number they currently have saved. This shortfall happens because quiet cost creep inflates everyday expenses month after month, while the savings target stays exactly the same. You cannot build a functional emergency fund if you do not know the exact financial weight it is required to catch. The rising cost of daily life is only part of the shift. The actual events that trigger an emergency have mutated as well. Individual, unexpected shocks, like sudden medical bills or major car repairs, routinely carry significantly larger price tags than they did in previous decades. The timeline for recovery has also stretched out. In many fields, securing a new job takes much longer than people plan for. Those old savings rules relied on assumptions regarding both the size of a financial crisis and the speed at which you could recover that no longer fit the current economy. If you work outside a traditional corporate structure, the fallback support is severely limited. For freelancers and contract workers, there is no severance package. Institutional benefits are harder to rely on, leaving you entirely dependent on your own personal savings. Despite these escalating challenges, maintaining a dedicated emergency fund remains the primary tool for preventing a temporary crisis from becoming a permanent debt cycle. But the strategy for building it, where you keep it, and how you scale it must directly mirror the specific financial reality you are living in right now. A resilient safety net requires constant adjustment to match the actual, evolving costs of your life. We all know life loves to throw curveballs. Keeping a stash of cash on hand so you avoid going into debt when something breaks is a rock-solid strategy. The core concept of an emergency fund remains entirely sound. The danger lies in the specific, rigid mathematical rules you have been told to follow to build one. The economy and how we work within it have shifted in 3 distinct ways. Because of these systemic changes, the old math people use to calculate their financial safety nets simply does not add up anymore. This chart shows exactly where the danger lies. You have an old-school mathematical baseline on one side and highly volatile modern data completely shattering it on the other. There is a massive gap between traditional financial advice and the realities you actually face. Building your savings based on that old mathematical baseline creates a false sense of security. You feel perfectly protected right up until an actual crisis hits and your safety net collapses on impact. The first major shift is straightforward. The absolute cost of dealing with a typical everyday emergency has risen significantly. Think about the sudden expenses that hit without warning. A blown tire on the highway, an unexpected urgent care visit, or having to call a plumber on a holiday weekend. This chart tracks the escalating costs of those exact emergency services over the last several years. Depending on where you live and what breaks, you are paying noticeably more today for the exact same fix. Notice the rigid horizontal line representing the old fixed savings advice. The rising costs quickly eclipse it. If your emergency fund falls short right now, you probably did not fail at saving. The price of the emergency simply outgrew the formula you used to prepare for it. Sizing your cash reserves based on what things cost a decade ago guarantees a mathematical shortfall when a problem strikes today. The second shift has to do with how money enters your bank account. Income stability and predictability look completely different for the modern workforce. The classic save a 3-month cushion rule was built for a very specific type of worker, someone receiving a steady, identical paycheck from a single employer week after week. But a massive segment of the population now relies on variable income. Freelancers, gig workers, contract employees, and people working on commission deal with monthly take-home pay that fluctuates wildly throughout the year. This area graph illustrates the danger of irregular earnings. When you try to map a rigid 90-day savings rule over a deep valley in your income, you expose a massive coverage gap. Your fund might look great during a strong stretch, but it leaves you completely exposed during a slow season. To survive those earning droughts, your reserves must be dynamically scaled to your specific lowest earning months. You can no longer rely on a flat monthly average to keep you safe. The third shift focuses on where your money actually sits. The physical location and the type of account holding your emergency fund matter significantly more now than they did in the past. For years, the standard advice was simple. You dropped your cash into a standard regular savings account and you forgot about it. Look at how this graph demonstrates the absolute boundary rule for this money. The shield represents absolute liquidity. Liquidity refers to how quickly and easily you can convert an asset into cash without losing value. Your emergency fund is not an investment. It must never be locked up or exposed to stock market crashes. But regular savings accounts often pay almost nothing in interest. The modern solution is to use insured, high-yield savings options. These modern accounts offer better returns while still letting you pull your cash out immediately without any penalties. Letting your cash sit in a zero-yield account actively drains its purchasing power. Over time, you slowly leak your own defensive strength to inflation. All three of these shifts point to one unifying principle. An emergency fund serves a very specific mechanical purpose. It is an active, necessary buffer standing between you and consumer debt. When something unexpected breaks and you do not have the cash to cover it, you are almost always forced to reach for a high-interest credit card to bridge the gap. That single swipe creates a compounding consequence. You end up paying interest on a one-time emergency for months or even years, long after the actual crisis is resolved. Think about this defensive cash like a heavy-duty shock absorber on a vehicle. This cross-section shows exactly how that works. A thin shock absorber is fine if the roads are smooth. But the financial roads of modern life are full of deep, destructive potholes, and you need a mechanism strong enough to absorb a massive, sudden impact. Running the old financial playbook leaves you driving with dangerously thin protection. The updated version is engineered to be stronger, smarter, and strategically positioned for the terrain you are actually driving on. Recognizing where these modern gaps leave you exposed is the required first step. Next, we will look at the most common mistakes people make with their cash reserves and lay out an action plan to fix them. People follow the standard rules of emergency savings because they want guaranteed financial safety and total peace of mind. But the old guidelines actually foster passive habits that quietly undermine that very security. Reaching a specific savings milestone creates a persistent illusion of safety, blinding people to their actual ongoing risk. Relying on these outdated habits leaves people entirely exposed when a real crisis hits. The first major pitfall is treating an emergency savings target like a permanent finish line, rather than an evolving metric. This chart compares a flat savings amount against a steadily rising trendline of living expenses. As costs climb, that fixed savings loses its protective power. The gap between static savings and current expenses remains invisible until an unexpected event forces the math into the open. The second structural error involves keeping emergency funds too easy to access, often sharing a digital or physical space with everyday spending accounts. When accounts live side by side, the psychological boundary blurs, and protected emergency money starts to feel indistinguishable from disposable extra cash. This leads to micro-draining. Non-urgent desires, like a flash sale or a weekend trip, get rationalized as necessary, slowly depleting the account over time. Failing to update targets and isolate funds turns a life-saving cushion into a temporary slush fund. By the time an actual emergency strikes, the money is already gone. The third error is a psychological barrier, the severe intimidation caused by this standard rule to save 6 months of living expenses. Calculating that massive long-term target causes behavioral paralysis. The number is so overwhelming that people perpetually delay starting their savings. A fractional, imperfectly funded account provides exponentially more immediate utility and optionality than a theoretical, perfectly funded account. Waiting for optimal financial conditions to start saving ensures that when unexpected costs hit, people remain at absolute zero readiness. The fourth error is confusing highly predictable, annualized expenses with true, unexpected emergencies. Costs like vehicle registrations, annual holiday gifts, or annual insurance premiums feel sudden when they arrive, but people routinely fail to budget for them separately. Because these predictable costs lack their own dedicated category, the true emergency fund is prematurely spent on routine life maintenance. The final behavioral pitfall happens after a legitimate emergency depletes the account, triggering an extreme emotional overcorrection. Driven by the fear of being exposed, people instinctively slash all discretionary spending in an attempt to rapidly rebuild the depleted fund. This flowchart illustrates the resulting feedback loop. Account depletion leads to aggressive budget slashing, which generates intense financial tension. That tension significantly increases the likelihood of impulsive financial failures, driving the cycle right back to account depletion. Treating predictable expenses as emergencies and rebuilding too aggressively creates a permanent state of financial crisis, actively defeating the psychological security the fund is meant to provide. Every one of these systemic errors stems from a genuine, positive desire to be financially responsible. The resulting vulnerabilities are mechanical execution failures, not character flaws. They can be fully resolved through intentional structural adjustments. Abandoning these outdated habits is the essential first step before implementing a modernized, structurally sound financial safety net. You understand why standard emergency fund advice needs an update. Relying on generic, static rules leaves your finances dangerously exposed when a real crisis hits. To fix this, we need to build a personalized protective system, step by step, rather than just guessing at a random number. Step 1 is establishing your baseline. Strip away the noise and filter your spending to isolate only essential monthly costs. Once you calculate that exact figure, write it down. This mathematical foundation is what your entire safety net builds on. If you do not anchor your savings goal to what it actually costs to run your life, you risk building a fund that completely fails to support you when you actually need it. Step 2 tackles how much money you actually need. That target should be dictated by how stable your income is, not a generic rule of thumb. Look at this comparison chart. If you have a steady paycheck with solid job security, 3 to 6 months is a reliable start. But if you rely on variable income, you need a much wider buffer zone. Sizing this buffer is highly personal. There is no single correct answer, but the math is straightforward. The less predictable your cash flow, the larger your cushion must be to give you breathing room. Step 3 is location. Move this emergency money into a dedicated, insured savings account at a completely separate bank from your everyday checking. Keeping the money housed somewhere else serves two specific purposes. It allows your cash to earn a higher yield, and it introduces enough physical friction to stop you from dipping into it for casual purchases. By establishing a target matched to your real income risk and locking it behind a banking barrier, you turn loose cash into a protected asset. Now that you have a target and a secure location, step 4 is to set up an automatic monthly transfer directly into that new emergency account. This flowchart details the required timing. You must schedule the transfer to execute immediately after your paycheck clears, intercepting the money and sending it to the secure vault before it ever enters your daily spending pool. Pick a transfer amount that feels sustainable. It shouldn't be so large that it strains your daily budget, but it needs to be consistent enough to actually build momentum over time. Automating this process removes your daily financial willpower from the equation. Taking the human element out of the transfer is the only reliable way to guarantee your safety net actually grows. Step 5 protects that core savings. You need to create a secondary, separate set-aside fund specifically for predictable, irregular expenses. These are the silent budget drains you already know are coming: annual memberships, back-to-school fees, yearly subscriptions, and routine car or home maintenance. Add up your total predictable expenses and divide by 12. Treat this figure as a fixed budget item, routed into a secondary container. When expected bills arrive, you pay from this waiting account, leaving your primary emergency vault completely untouched. True emergencies are actually quite rare, but large, predictable expenses are mathematically guaranteed. Separating the two is exactly how you prevent your core safety net from bleeding dry. Step 6 requires you to write a one-page emergency plan right now, while everything is fine, before a crisis ever occurs. Think through 3 highly realistic scenarios. Map out a sudden drop in income, a pet medical bill, and a last-minute flight for a family emergency. For each specific scenario, write down the exact first 3 actions you will take. Note which expenses you will cut immediately, who you need to call, and exactly which account you will pull the funds from. When an emergency actually hits, human beings do not process information rationally. Sudden stress severely limits your ability to make clear, strategic decisions on the fly. Having this pre-written document acts as an operational fail-safe. It allows you to execute a calm, logical protocol and protects you from making expensive, emotion-driven mistakes in the heat of the moment. Step 7 is maintenance. You need to set an annual review reminder to audit your emergency system against your current financial reality. This chart shows the metric to check. Once a year, compare your current monthly essential spending against the total balance sitting in your emergency fund. If lifestyle costs rise, increase your target baseline. If income grows, scale up your automated transfer amount. Skipping this annual calibration guarantees that your emergency fund will slowly fall out of date, steadily losing its protective power against inflation and lifestyle changes. This is how you stop treating your savings as a static pile of cash. The modern emergency fund is an actively managed, highly customized system built specifically to handle the actual math of your life. If this helped you figure out a better emergency fund target, tap like so more people can find it. If you know someone still relying on the old 3 to 6 month rule, send this video to them. Comment your fund goal below and subscribe for new videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. I will see you in the next one.